Hi guys, I put out a new Critical Fallibilism article yesterday called Learning and the Subconscious Bullet Points, and we're going to talk about it. So here's the CF homepage. First of all, if you haven't yet, you can hit subscribe in the top right, and you will get free emails. If you're on a mobile phone, or you have a thin browser window, it'll look more like this, and you click here, and then subscribe shows up. Subscribe is also at the bottom in the footer. So the new articles will show up under recent articles, and then this one is also in the skills section. You can click to expand or collapse the sections. So learning and the subconscious bullet points. The previous 5 articles in this section are all somewhat relevant. They have to do with intuition and the subconscious. However, they deal with somewhat different topics, like not suppressing your intuition and how to incorporate intuition into rational debates or discussions. So there's going to be a somewhat different focus in the current article. The table of contents will go to the right if your window is big enough, and then it'll stay there when you scroll up and down. But I need the font size pretty big for doing a screencast. And I don't need the table of contents on screen during the entire screencast, so we're going to have it like this. So I did a lot of section headers to help organize the article for you guys. It is fairly long, and this will make it a lot easier to go back to the article later and find a specific part that you want to review. So I started with an article summary. This is just like an abstract for an academic paper, same concept. So you can figure out, do you want to read this article? Is it relevant? What's it about? Right at the beginning. I think it's good in this case because the way I start the argument, or start the article, I'm building up to an argument, so you won't know what it's about or what the point is right at the very beginning. When I say your brain is literally the computer, I'm jumping in to setting up my premises to make an important point. So that is a reason I wanted to have a summary first, so you know what you're reading. So I'm going to read the summary because it's particularly important and relevant. Your subconscious has most of your brain power. To become a great thinker, focus on teaching your subconscious and delegating work to it. Don't focus on conscious analysis. The subconscious isn't the irrational part of your mind. It's a necessary part of rational thinking. I explain the importance of the subconscious, discuss how to improve your subconscious with practice, and discuss managing your error rate. So one of the things I wanted to address is there are a lot of people who think they're rational and are kind of hostile to the subconscious. Usually not using the word subconscious. They often use other words like intuitions or hunches or gut feelings, which are in these bullet points right here. So they think that stuff is irrational, and the way to be a good philosopher or critical thinker or do good analysis is to put in lots and lots of conscious focus. They put on their thinking hat, they wait till they're in a really good mood and they're not tired at all, and then they try really hard and they get exhausted and they don't do it very often because it's so much work, which is problematic. But the biggest problem is not the frequency. It is the method itself of trying to do everything with your conscious mind does not work well because your conscious mind is not big enough. It doesn't have enough computing power. It's not powerful enough. All the really great thinkers use a ton of subconscious thinking. And even like average or above average thinkers use some. You can't get that far to advance ideas or be really clever just by trying really hard with your conscious mind. The only route that's ever going to work is to improve your subconscious because over 99% of your computing power is controlled / used by your subconscious. Your brain is literally a computer. It does computations. This is not an analogy. The computations it can do are the same set of functions that a desktop computer can do at a fundamental level. The software it's running is very different than a desktop computer, and the hardware has significant differences too. But fundamentally, if you look at what computations can it do in terms of basic math, it's the same thing. So, when you think you're doing computing, and it's not even that important that it's a computer, it's just most of the thinking resources in your brain are in the subconscious. The stuff you can do consciously is just a tiny fraction, like less than 1% of all the brain power you have. Most of your brain power is not in your conscious mind. So if you only use your conscious mind, you're not using most of your brain power. That's my main point that I really wanted to get across at the beginning. I've got a few other main points later. So one analogy I've used before is a factory with a lot of workers, and you can think of your conscious mind as the manager, and then the factory has thousands of workers, and your conscious mind can go around and supervise what they do, or even do jobs for them. But it's really inefficient if your one manager is doing the work. You need to delegate it to the workers, and there are so many workers you can't even supervise them very well. If someone's new on the job, you can supervise them quite a bit. But some of your old workers need to be able to go months without any supervision, or you're going to be way too busy and it'll put a limit on how many workers you can have in the factory. Like, you have enough brain power for, say, 10,000 workers, but if you use your conscious mind poorly, if you're an inefficient manager, then you might only be able to have like 500 workers because you can't manage to manage more of them. You don't teach them their jobs and supervise them and stuff well enough to have more workers, so you're wasting most of your brain power. But people do manage to teach their subconscious some things really well, like walking or typing. Those are skills that a lot of people are very good at without conscious attention. A lot of people are not very good typists, by the way, but there are definitely like millions of people who are actually really good typists who can touch type without thinking about it, like me. Okay, so the basic idea is your conscious's main job is to make your subconscious better, to teach it to do tasks, to delegate work to it, to make sure that all that other brain power outside your conscious mind is being used. So instead of your conscious mind trying to do most of your thinking for you, its job should be to make sure all that other brain power outside your conscious mind is doing a lot of good thinking. That is far more efficient. Whenever your conscious mind is trying to figure things out, it's fine if you're learning new things, if you're doing something creative, because you can't delegate that to your subconscious, but if you're doing something you could delegate, then you should be delegating it. In other words, conscious attention should be used for self-improvement, and if you use it for anything else, that's wasteful. So basically, figuring out new things and then teaching them to your subconscious is the goal of your conscious mind, and if you do that a lot, then you'll become smart and clever and stuff. So sometimes people fail to recognize what subconscious ideas are. Like, they put emotions in different categories than intuitions. And they think those things might just be kind of irrational, kind of like a superstition even. Like, believing in an intuition is kind of like believing in ghosts to some people. One of the things I talked about in some of the previous articles was how to learn more about your intuitions. In other words, people find introspection difficult, and they're often pretty bad at introspection. So I gave a specific method you can use, which is kind of like playing 20 questions, where you bring up a bunch of different questions or scenarios, mostly hypothetical scenarios, and then you let your intuition react to them, and then you're gathering data points. What does it think of this scenario? What if we change the scenario? What if we change one factor in the scenario, and then get a response from our intuition? And you can keep doing that to narrow down what your intuition thinks and to find patterns. Anyway, these things in your subconscious are pieces of knowledge. There's actual knowledge there. They are units of subconscious thought. So I would often call them ideas, but you could call them something else. It doesn't especially matter what your terminology is. I think that units of thought or of subconscious thought or pieces of knowledge are fairly good neutral terms, whereas just calling them inexplicit or subconscious ideas is I find that convenient and I use it a lot, but it could be more objectionable. Anyway, there are these things there, and they do have knowledge in them. They're not random or arbitrary. They have design to them. They were evolved in your mind. They're suitable to purposes. They have the appearance of design for a purpose. It gets into stuff about how evolution works and how knowledge creation works that I've talked about elsewhere. David Deutsch has also talked about that stuff, about what knowledge is in terms of evolution and the appearance of design and Paley's problem and stuff like that. So some people have a different perspective on knowledge where they don't think that you can have knowledge without a knowing subject. To use, I think that might be a quote, but it's at least a paraphrase of something Popper said. I think he might have made it a section title or even chapter title. He was talking about how you can have knowledge without a knowing subject. There can be knowledge in a book. And some people deny that. They don't think a book or a gene can contain knowledge. Only a mind, a thinker, can contain knowledge, according to them. So they don't think that animals have knowledge like embodied in their body, like a wing or an eye. They don't see that as knowledge. They see it as something else, like complexity. Anyways, I think all that stuff is a bit confused, but it's a bit tangential. Anyway, there's computation happening in your subconscious. There's computation in your brain that you're not consciously aware of. And it does real, actual thinking, and you need to use it. So the people who think basically that you train your conscious mind and learn things, and then you become a great thinker, are wrong. If you want to be really smart, you got to use your subconscious, because it has most of your computing power in it. Right, that's my first main point. So we're going to make like a super abbreviated version in notes here. People often try to learn philosophy ideas, like they study Plato and what did Plato say and what were his ideas. A lot of philosophy teaching is kind of oriented towards teaching the history of philosophy. Partly this is because people disagree about which thinkers and ideas were actually good. A lot of controversies don't get resolved. Philosophy is a difficult field in various ways. And I think our methods of resolving intellectual disagreements are pretty bad. And then we made a special exception for science where we're somewhat better at it, but still pretty bad. A lot of science is pretty bad, but at least some of the main points in like physics and chemistry seem to have been sorted out. Not all the main points, like the multiverse stuff, is an open issue. But it's sorted out enough that we can make spaceships, and they work. So we have some understanding of gravity and force and all that. Anyway, philosophy is extra-oriented compared to other fields towards teaching the history of ideas and teaching a bunch of different ideas. But if you actually want to be a good thinker or a great philosopher, that's not entirely what you need. It's good to have some understanding of previous ideas and try to find some good ones you can build on. But you also need to learn, okay, how do I be a good thinker? And just learning what Plato thought and what Kant thought is not going to teach you how to be a creative thinker or an effective analyst or whatever. There's other philosophy stuff that teaches different things and tries to teach skills, but there's quite a bit where people will study the history. So if you want to actually solve problems, win debates, guide debates to correct conclusions, figure out what's true, come up with new ideas, then what you really need to do is improve your subconscious. There's two main ways to do that. One, do it during early childhood. So for everyone reading this or watching this video, it's too late. And even if it wasn't too late, like if you're a 3-year-old and you're watching this, I can't tell you exactly what to do, so it's not really going to help, sorry. Like I can give some general guidance, but I can't tell you specific instructions. And probably a 3-year-old isn't going to understand the general guidance and be able to use it. Like, this article is probably just way too advanced for a 3-year-old, so... But if you're the parent of a 3-year-old, and you read the article, and you understand it well, and then you share some of the ideas with your 3-year-old, would that help? Maybe, but maybe not. Like, the early childhood stuff is just really unreliable, and we don't really know how to make it work well. So, option 2 is train and improve your subconscious on purpose when you're a teenager or older. And you could try to start a bit younger. But anyways, like, the people, my audience is probably mostly age like 15 plus, and so you need to put work into improving instead of just relying on having done a good job when you were a kid, which almost no one did anyways. So what do? The basic main idea is you practice. So you need to find skills and often break them into parts or sub-skills or sub-goals or whatever, sub-projects, and work on them and practice. And practice is the key activity for getting your subconscious to be good at things. So you can read things and think about them and figure them out consciously, but how do you teach your subconscious? How do you get your subconscious to learn it? That involves practicing to try to make it more automatic, more intuitive, so you can do it on autopilot. So I talk about how you already have subconscious skills. I give some examples, like you can use a fork. I hit a thumb button on my mouse. All right, we're back. When you use a fork, you use many different muscles. You're moving your arm and your wrist and your fingers and stuff. It takes significant coordination. It takes young kids a while to learn that skill, just like it takes them a long time to be able to walk. A lot of practice goes into that stuff that you might take for granted as an adult. So with a bunch of practice, you can learn it subconsciously, and then your subconscious can do it for you. And then when you're an adult, it seems just easy and trivial and like something you don't even have to think about. And then another big thing I talk about is physical skills versus mental skills. So people understand practice better when it comes to physical skills like walking and typing and hitting a ball, throwing a ball, catching a ball, sports. So some mental skills are things like doing single-digit additions in your head, or translating letters that you read into words, or recognizing grammar errors. We use lots and lots of small mental skills, and our subconscious does a lot of them for us. So I talked a bit about an example with fluent English speakers can recognize a lot of grammar errors. Like if I say, thought I philosophy about, that sounds wrong to you if you're a fluent English speaker. When it sounds wrong to you, you might not recognize that that means your subconscious has done computation, it has done thinking, and it has found an error. And it has then reported that to your conscious mind in the form of an intuition, rather than the form of a sentence in words. It is an inexplicit idea. Similarly, emotions are a way that your subconscious reports information to your conscious mind that is not in words, it's not in English. So, the basic thing you do with practice is you automatize skills, particularly for this stuff, mental skills. So you want to automatize a bunch of mental skills so that your subconscious can do the work. So your subconscious brain power can do those skills, and that frees up your conscious mind for learning new skills and teaching them to your subconscious and repeat. So every time you delegate something, it frees up more conscious brain power, which you can use to learn something new and then delegate it, which then frees the brain power up again for the next thing, and you keep doing that, and that is how you make progress. So you want to get to the point that your subconscious is doing most of the work for any kind of skill that you're going to reuse a lot or build upon. So if you want to learn some introductory or beginner knowledge and then build some intermediate knowledge on that and then build some advanced knowledge on that, the beginner and intermediate parts cannot be taking much of your attention or it's not going to work. By attention, I mean conscious attention. So conscious attention is a scarce bottleneck resource. You need to treat it as precious. Whenever you spend it to get a task done, you're squandering the resource. You're limiting your own improvement. The more you spend on improvement, the better. The more you spend on anything other than improvement, the worse. Every time you use conscious attention to try to complete a task, instead of letting your subconscious do it, instead of delegating, then you are taking that conscious resource away from self-improvement. If you focus on self-improvement, you'll get to the point that your subconscious can do more of the stuff and you'll get way more done. Every time you use your conscious attention and you're not doing improvement, it is a setback. It's like with money. You can use money, you can invest it, you can use it for getting more money, more wealth, or you can consume it, you can buy luxuries. So you invest it, you get a lot richer than if you consume it, but it's okay to consume it sometimes. So whenever you do self-improvement, if that's what you spend your conscious attention on, that is like investing in your future. Whenever you spend your conscious attention on getting a task done, that's consumption. You're using it up with no long-term benefits. Automation can be partial. In some of the text, I kind of talk about it like you automatized it or you didn't. But you can automatize more parts of something so that your subconscious does more of the work. And if you get something to the point where it takes a low amount of conscious attention, that's good. And it doesn't have to be as low as the amount of conscious attention required for walking. So process. Learn something consciously, refine it, get high quality knowledge, low error rate. Then you begin practicing and you make adjustments. And in this part, you're doing it pretty slowly so that you can consciously pay attention to what you're doing. Then once things are going smoothly, once you're satisfied with how you're doing it, when your knowledge meets your standards and you're done working the kinks out, then you practice more to speed up and automate it. You get your subconscious to become good at it. You practice until you can do it when you're tired, when you're not paying attention. And so that you're not just going to forget it. If you forget things a month later, that is a sign that you are relying on your conscious mind. If you actually practice enough to get it into your subconscious, that will often stay with you for years. And come back with only a quick refresher, even like 10 years later, is pretty common. Okay, what if you need to change an automation? What if it's wrong? This is going to happen sometimes. You're not perfect. Some of your ideas are incorrect. You're going to discover flaws in them. You don't want this to happen all the time, especially with recent ideas. If you keep automatizing an idea and then trying to change it a month later, and then another month later you realize, oh, that was wrong too, and you have to change it again. That's bad. That's inefficient. But you can change them, and if you are occasionally changing things from a few years ago, that's totally reasonable to revisit things and come up with better ideas and make changes. Changing is not a huge deal, but it does take some extra effort. So you want to reduce the amount of it, but it doesn't need to be near zero. It can be a medium amount. And the majority of the changes should be for your older ideas. New ideas should be changed mostly before they're automatized rather than right after you automatize them. So anyways, if you need to change an automation, what can you do? I'll add a bullet point. So basically, you do it slower and more consciously. You de-automatize it. You get conscious control over it. You stop doing it on autopilot and you take conscious control. You go slowly and intentionally, following a conscious plan. Once you get conscious control over it, then you can make changes. You can think about, how do I want this to be different? You can make adjustments, and then you gotta change to a way you're happy with, and then you practice again to speed up and automatize the new version. And that can overwrite the old version. And if it's a really old skill that you've been doing for, years and years and years, it can take more work to make changes. But it is still completely possible, and sometimes you can change old skills, like really old habits, without all that much work. Sometimes it goes pretty smoothly, and sometimes it seems a bit harder and you're more forgetful at the change. And it's not entirely clear why that is or what the difference is or what happens. So the amount of work to change a automatized skill varies. It can be high with older skills that are really ingrained, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that high. One thing that makes it harder to change is if you're conflicted about it, if you think maybe the old way is better. Like, sometimes your boss tells you have to do this differently now, and you think the old way is better, but you're trying to learn the new way, then you're probably going to have a harder time changing, and you're going to be more forgetful and keep doing the old thing, unless you're really scared and that motivates you or something. But if you sort of disagree with what you're doing, and you have low motivation, and you don't care that much, you're probably just going to keep autopiloting the old thing sometimes. Okay, so you can de-automatize skills, change them, then re-automatize the new version. It is also possible sometimes to change automatized skills in a faster process, to use a shortcut. You can think about what you want to do differently and visualize it and tell yourself what changes to make, and sometimes that works. And it's just not super reliable or understood, so if it doesn't work, you can do the full process. But if you want to try taking the shortcut, you can try it, no big deal. Don't Don't try it for a long time. Don't get stuck on it. But if you want to try it quickly and cheaply, that's totally fine. And you can see if it ever works for you and maybe pick up on patterns of when it works and when it's worth a try. Okay, so now I'm going to talk more about mental skills. So people understand practicing mental skills less than physical skills. A foreign language is a decent example of a primarily mental skill. Things are often mixed. Like, if you're doing research, you have to take notes, and taking notes is a physical skill. Controlling your computer, like typing in Google searches, is physical. So it's not purely mental. Almost all skills are going to have some of both, but you can see them as primarily mental or physical. So people use flashcards. There are physical activities you can do when practicing mental skills. You don't just sit there and silently try to practice in your head. You can do that sometimes, but most of your practice, even for mental skills, should involve some activity where you do something, like you're at least using flashcards as a physical activity. You're looking at things and you flip the card over and there's steps to it. Even reading things or taking notes or writing things down are all involve some level of physical activity, not just silently sitting and thinking. And so it's pretty important not to stop learning early. There's a problem people often have. They learn something consciously and they're like, ooh, I succeeded, I can do it, and then they're done. They never automatize it, they never teach their subconscious. One of the reasons they do this is they didn't actually want to learn it, like they just want to pass a school test. And you can be in conscious mode for the school test and then forget it later. But if you actually care about what you're learning, people still stop early. Partly bad habit, partly they just don't understand the learning process. So you can do math worksheets, grammar worksheets. These are ways of working on mental skills with some sort of process or activity. You can make tree diagrams, flowcharts, notes, outlines. You can do research. You could take many different subjects and research them, and then you'd be practicing research, which is primarily a mental skill. You could debate people. Debate is primarily a mental skill. It's about thinking about the issues and deciding what to say. It's like how writing is primarily a mental skill. Although if you don't know how to handwrite and you're trying to handwrite, you got to learn the physical skill, and there's work in that. Same with if you don't know how to type and you're trying to type. There's a significant physical skill, but once you've got that automatized, then the part that's hard for most people is the mental part of deciding what to say and how to phrase it and stuff. So there's lots of practical activities you can do for mental skills, and it is really important to come up with practice activities and actually do them. A lot of how people get stuck learning philosophy or just never get good at it is they read stuff and they say, this is cool, and maybe they write a little, and they don't really practice anything. They never figure out what are some subparts I can practice where I can judge success and failure. That's part of practicing, is you need to have something with a goal where you can say, okay, this is what correct is. And then you practice until you're getting it correct a lot, and you teach your subconscious to do it correctly. It's impossible to practice with no idea what correctness is, because practice involves, like, you try it, and then if you got it right, you try to repeat what you did, and if you got it wrong, you try to make an adjustment. You have to be able to judge what's right or wrong. You wouldn't want to just practice doing random actions with no concept of what the goal is or what success or failure are. If you're unclear on what success and failure are, you need to do other things like exploration, which is different than practice. Although people sometimes mix them together a little bit. They'll try something out and they think of that as practice, but what they're really doing is exploring, not doing the phase where you're trying to ingrain it into yourself. So when you learn ideas, people often have trouble with using them in their life. And to use the ideas in your life, and this comes up especially with my work because I write about pretty abstract things. So the more abstract it is, very approximately, that means the harder it is to use in your life, or the less that's going to happen automatically. You have to actually put some work into using it in your life. So you need things like triggers that your subconscious recognizes for when this is relevant, when you should use it. That's one of the key issues with actually using it in your life, is knowing when to use it, and that is a thing you can practice. You can get a list of 50 scenarios and go through them and decide which ones would I want to use this idea in, and which ones is it not needed in. And you can practice until you quickly and easily recognize when the idea is relevant, when should you be using it, what things does it apply to. You can practice applying it to many different things to see when it works, when it's useful or not. until you figure out the patterns of when you should be using it or not. And if you haven't done that, then you're probably not going to use it in your life much because you don't know when to use it in your life. So it's reasonably common that people practice how to do something rather than when to do it, and you need both or you're not going to use it. So if you think you agree on something sounds nice, you're not done learning, you're not going to use it. You need to practice using it, practice the how to use it, and practice the when to use it. You need an understanding of when to use it and when not to use it. And people often have very superficial, naive, unrealistic understandings of when to use it. They're like, oh, this is about thinking, so I'll use it in all the times when I want to do good thinking. And it's not specific enough, and they're not actually going to use it in that many scenarios. It's like how people make these checklists of things to worry about. Like, they might list like 10 potential errors, and then they're like, okay, every time I do anything, I will check all these 10 errors in case I made them. And it's like, no, that's too much work. You need a better way of recognizing when you should be giving conscious attention to one of these errors potentially being there. You need your subconscious to recognize when you might be making an error so that you can consciously analyze it. And you need to have not too many false positives. When your subconscious thinks maybe there's an error here, there should be like at least like a 10% chance of an error. You don't want to be consciously checking for errors that most of the time, way more than half, even more than like 90% of the time, just aren't there, because that will take too much work. So you want a low false negative rate. You don't want to be missing errors, but you also want a low false positive rate. You don't want to be wasting your conscious mind's attention. So you want your subconscious to catch virtually all of the errors, at least flag them for some conscious thinking, but without many false alarms. Okay, so then I wrote about self-improvement. You have limited time for conscious focus on stuff. So if you want to be productive during the rest of the day, your subconscious needs to be good at stuff. If you were trying to be a conscious-only philosopher, then you wouldn't be able to do philosophy most of the time. Or you wouldn't be able to use it. You'd go through most of your life not using it. If you can only use it when you're paying conscious attention, then you're not going to use it most of the time. So during your precious conscious time, you can focus on learning and practice, figuring out new stuff and delegating it to your subconscious. Keep doing self-improvement, and you can get into a virtuous circle where, because you're now better, you're even more powerful and you can improve faster and better. And, it can be a feedback mechanism where your improvement helps your next improvement and you can get exponentially better. So you want to do tasks like non-self-improvement tasks later when they're easy and your subconscious is doing almost all the work. That's preferable. If you do them early, like as soon as you're able to do them, then you're going to do them when they're kind of hard. And this is going to make your conscious mind do more of the work. It's going to waste or consume more conscious resources. Also, the earlier you do it, the more chance of errors. The more chance that you're just going to fail and have to redo it. And people are often doing projects that are hard for them, and then they have a significant failure rate. And it would have been more efficient to do easier projects successfully, rather than do the more ambitious projects and fail. So you can occasionally, if something's really urgent, if there's a good reason to do it right now, use a bunch of conscious mental resources on it. But that's taking those away from focusing on self-improvement. So the more that happens, the worse off you're going to be, and the harder it is to be a great thinker to ever become really smart. If you want to be a great thinker, you need all the self-improvement you can get. You need all the subconscious automatizations that you can get. The more of those you have, the better thinker you're going to be. So if you want to do something, you can consider, what learning can I do first so that my subconscious will be able to do all or most of this? And can I just wait until I get that learning done and then do it? If you get in the habit of doing that, if that's your general policy, you'll get better and better. Whereas your general policy is you're like, well, learning's going to take too long. I want to get it done now, and you keep doing that over and over. Then you're never going to get a good subconscious, so learning's always going to take too long. You're always going to be behind on your learning, and it'll be hard to ever fix that. At some point, you're going to have to decide some things can wait and stop putting so much conscious attention into getting things done right now and redirect that conscious attention to learning and self-improvement. If you never do that, you're never going to make much progress. Another important issue is which skills do you automatize and how much work do you put into the automatizations? And it's stuff that you're going to build on or reuse that you really want to automatize well. Whereas if you're going to use something once and it's not very important, then you don't even need to automatize it. You can just learn it consciously and then do it, and then you're done. And that'll save effort, because practicing it would have taken more time than just doing it. It would have used up more conscious resources to teach it to your subconscious than to just do it the one time and be done. If something is really important or high risk, though, then a bunch of practice can be worth it even if you only do it once or twice, such as a space flight to the moon. That is high risk. You really don't want to make a mistake, so you do a lot of practice. So most stuff is not particularly high risk. So it's okay if your automation is less good and make some mistakes if you're not building on it a lot and reusing a lot. But if it's introductory knowledge that you're going to build intermediate layers on, which you're going to build advanced layers on, and that's really a simplification, there could easily be 20 layers or more. If you're going to have many, many layers on something, then it needs to be really good. The more layers, the more quality is needed. The more layers above it, specifically. When you get to the very, edge of your knowledge, the cutting edge stuff that you're not actually building on, that's, the best you can do, then you're going to have fewer automatizations, and it's going to take more conscious work to deal with. And to support that work, you want to have all the easier stuff, all the prior stuff, really well automatized, so it's not distracting you from the hard part that requires your conscious attention to do it all. That's if you want to do, research, work on new things, which not everyone does. Okay, so how to be a great thinker. Learn effectively. Learn how to learn effectively, then effectively learn critical thinking skills, then study prerequisites followed by advanced concepts. Use your critical thinking skills to innovate. So more specifically, we can look at this in terms of learning the general concepts about the subconscious, practice, automation, mastery, etc. Then you teach those skills to your subconscious. You want your subconscious to be good at critical thinking. You use some of these concepts for improving your subconscious. And you can get some of these into your subconscious, so your subconscious can teach itself some, which is really powerful, but it's hard to do super reliably, but it'll work some. But there's no process to make it work a lot. So then you study prerequisites and then advanced concepts, and you keep using the process where you're automatizing things. And you use the critical thinking skills that you've developed. First you work on critical thinking skills, and then you work on other concepts. So it's kind of first learning skills, then critical thinking, and then specific topics like economics or science or something come afterwards. And you've already built up a base of skills that are going to help you figure out what's correct and how to learn effectively. And then you can find decisive errors in concepts, find unsolved problems, brainstorm solutions, do critical thinking about your solutions, etc., etc. Those are some of the big picture goals of what you want to be able to do as a great thinker. Okay, now somewhat changing topics, but related, is error rate management and integration. So advanced ideas build on intermediate ideas, which build on more basic ideas. There can be many layers. Metaphorically, you can think of it as building with a bunch of stories or floors, and the higher floors are weighing down on the lower floors, so a floor near the bottom has a ton of weight on top of it. I don't think this is a perfectly accurate metaphor for how structural integrity in buildings work. I think a lot of skyscrapers, they don't make it pyramid shaped, they just make it, the bottom floor isn't really, thicker than the top floors very much. I think they do reduce the amount of structural integrity as they go up a little bit, but not as much as you might expect. I don't know exactly how it works. But anyways, for ideas, you can think of it somewhat as a pyramid. It is in some ways a better analogy than a skyscraper. In the pyramid, you have to make the low layers really, really strong, so they actually make them wider, thicker, bigger. Pyramids are simpler to build than skyscrapers. It's a more reliable building technique that's easier to get right. Skyscrapers use more like special or advanced architectural techniques. Okay, so when you build up an idea using previous ideas, that's called integration, because you're integrating, aka combining, multiple units into one new unit. This idea comes from Ayn Rand's Objectivism. So to get to advanced ideas, you need many integrations. You integrate, and then you can take the product of that integration, that higher level idea. Like if you integrate level 0 ideas, you get a level 1 idea. If you integrate several level 1 ideas, now you have a level 2 idea. And you don't always have to integrate ideas from the same level. But as a very simplified model, you integrate the level 0s to get the level 1s, which you integrate to get the level 2s, and so on. But you can actually integrate like a level 0 with a level 2, and then you get something that doesn't have a very clearly defined numerical level to it, because thinking's kind of messy and complicated. But anyways, we can't consciously think about hundreds of things at once. So integration is one of the things that helps with that. Because you can take 5 ideas and you integrate them into one new idea, a combination thing, kind of like a summary, or a single concept that takes the important stuff from the previous ideas. And the point is it can be dealt with on its own by itself as a single unit of thought, so you only have to fit one thing in your mind. However, it is based on 5 older things. And related to this, if you automatize those older things, that helps too. Automation helps you work with the limited amount you can fit in your conscious mind, because your subconscious has a bunch of skills and can do a bunch of stuff without requiring conscious attention. Like, you don't have to consciously check for grammar and math errors if your subconscious can catch them. There are lots of logic errors that your intuition might be able to flag. Like, sometimes people are reading something and they're not consciously looking for logical fallacies, but then they notice one. What happened? Their subconscious caught it for them. They did not consciously analyze, is this logical fallacy present? They just had an intuition that it was there, or something along those lines. That is their subconscious having that skill to catch that issue. Anyway, so if you are building up your ideas in a hierarchy with many layers, and you have an error in a lower layer, that's going to cause a lot of trouble in the higher layers too. So you need to manage your error rate and have quality standards. And I talk about software and how error rates that are very, very low, like well under 1%, can still lead to daily errors if something is being reused in enough computations. So if something's reused enough, you need error rates way below 1%. Whereas if something is closer to the high level, then 1% error rate might be okay. And if it's in like the current layer, then maybe a 10% error rate is okay, because you're paying a lot of conscious attention anyways. There's also different types of errors. Some errors, like you can easily recognize the error and fix it, and other errors, you don't realize you made an error even if you're paying conscious attention, so that's more of a problem. You can think about that in terms of building too. If you're building a skyscraper and you have a building process that can create a hidden error, like in a wall, in a structural thing where you're not going to see the error and you're not going to realize the error's there, that's really bad. You really want to avoid those. On the other hand, if you have a process that has a 10% chance of making an error that you're going to definitely notice and fix, then it might not be worth lowering that error rate. It might be easier to just fix it 10% of the time than to find a way to never have to fix it. You can just think about efficiency, but that only works with errors that you're not going to miss. The invisible errors are a lot more dangerous. And that leads to processes for searching for errors. Like people, when they build a building, they need to not just build it and not just glance at it for visible errors. They need to actually have processes where they look around and use tools and measure things and try to make sure there aren't invisible errors. Because there are some types of errors that you can't easily see, but if you use the right measurements or safety precautions or checks or whatever, you can find them. So like there's things that inspectors know to look for. And it's the same with philosophy, where there's errors you're going to see really easily, and there's errors that if you're consciously looking and you use the right inspection methods, you could find them. And then there's other errors which you just don't understand and don't even know to look for, which are even more dangerous, because they could have subtle effects that are making things go wrong, and you have no idea why. You just don't understand what the issue is. Anyway, you want to get a low error rate for stuff that's frequently reused and that you build a lot on top of. people often get confused because something's going wrong, and they look in the current layer and the several layers before it for errors. But the error was like 5 or 10 levels earlier. And it's confusing to people because when they screw up a layer, they often don't realize it right away. Like, it can still hold the next few layers. It's not so weak that it just can't support the next layer. If it was like that, they'd realize they're not done and they'd keep working on it. But they get it good enough that they can do a few more layers, and then they get stuck and they don't realize, oh, it's that old thing wasn't really automatized well enough. It wasn't really done. It's screwing up too much. You want to get things to the point that they're going to be able to hold lots and lots of future layers, not just the next few. Don't get it just barely good enough and move on. Learn at higher quality. This, of course, requires that your learning is actually effective. A lot of the times people rush to the next stages is because they're not very good at learning, and they have very low confidence that if they put more learning effort in, it'll actually improve. They're like, well, if I keep trying on this, I'll never get better anyways because I don't really know how to improve it. So they just keep going and hope it'll work, and it often doesn't really, and then they don't end up good thinkers. Or at least not great thinkers. It can be hard to find errors in old layers that you don't consciously remember how they work anymore. You can keep notes and practice introspection techniques and various other things. You can periodically use ideas, partially consciously, so that you refresh stuff in your memory. For a low error rate, you need to clearly understand ideas before you're satisfied. People often just sort of put up with some confusion. School teaches them, oh, you're a bit confused. Well, you passed the test and we're moving on now. That's what learning is, good enough. And then a lot of people, even if they try to do better, they get stuck and don't really know how. But if you want to be a great thinker, you need to somehow figure out some ideas you're not confused about and then build on those. And work on new knowledge adjacent to your knowledge that is not confused. And that often means going back to more basic stuff because you have a bunch of partially confused layers of knowledge. And you need to go back and rework some of that to not be so confused anymore. You need more of a clear, confident understanding of what you're doing that comes from actual knowledge, not just arrogance. So one way to look at learning is you go through a succession of problems and you progress to better problems. That's a Popperian viewpoint. You can see it as evolving your ideas. You can also look at it in terms of automation and integration. And another way to look at it is in terms of improving your ability to evaluate ideas. You need to be able to actually judge what's correct or not before you can move on to the next thing. And you need to make a succession of being able to judge different things. And there are fairly simple things that you can judge, and then you need to find something adjacent to that and work on it until you can clearly and confidently judge that, and then you work on the next thing adjacent to that and keep going. If you skip a bunch of steps and are partially confused, then you're going to get to a scenario where everything is partially confusing and you can't check your own work very well. And so it's really hard to practice and learn anything because you can't actually tell when you're doing it right. And so you need to back up to things where you actually can judge your own work accurately and then build from there and keep it accurate the whole way. You don't have to absolutely 100% do that, but you want to get a lot closer to that than what people usually do. People get really stuck by having quality standards that are too low, and then they keep going and they just keep piling partial knowledge on partial knowledge, and it's all a little bit confused. And then they can't really practice anything because they're not really sure about whether their ideas are any good anyways. They're coming up with these complicated, advanced, high-level ideas, but they just don't have the skill to make good ideas like that. And they really need to take a break and work on self-improvement and build their way up from their best knowledge that is actually really, really high quality and low error rate. So, and a lot of times I see people try to do that and they won't go back far enough. And they do stuff where I can see tons of errors and they don't see those errors. But if I'm seeing tons of errors, that means that it isn't high enough quality. And they should go back further because they can do some things where I will not see tons of errors. Lots of them can do arithmetic and I'm not going to find a bunch of errors. So that is an example that they do have some knowledge that works at higher quality standards. They can take a ruler and measure an object and figure out how long it is. And I'm not going to find a bunch of errors in their measurements. They can actually do that correctly, and they know they're doing it correctly. It seems like obvious and common sense to them that this is how you take a ruler, and you put it at one end, and then you read the number at the other end. You see how far it is, and like they know how to use a ruler. That is a skill they have. Anyways, you have tons of things that you actually can do well. You know how to use a microwave. You open it and you put the food in, and then you close it, and you know that those are the 3 steps. And also you have to turn it on or whatever. But like you actually understand with high confidence, and you can tell when you're doing it right. Like if you open the microwave and then you put the food next to the microwave and then you close the microwave, that's wrong. You did it wrong. And if you open the microwave and you put the food in the microwave and then you close it, that's correct. You did it correctly. And you can see the difference. And you can imagine like a 2-year-old might not know that and might do it wrong. They might set the food next to the microwave. Conceivably. They might not because they've seen you do it and they might just copy what you do. But anyways, they might also, it's possible that a 2-year-old would be like, well, that microwave cooks things. You put things near the cooker and then they get cooked, and they might try to cook it themselves just by putting it next to the microwave. Or like on the microwave because they've seen you put food on the stove and they don't know exactly which part is doing the cooking, perhaps. So they might think that if they put something on the microwave, they could cook it. Who knows? Anyway, the point is, it's possible to get that wrong. Like you can conceive of someone getting that wrong. You're just really good at it. And so it seems to you, it's like almost impossible to get wrong. It seems like almost infallible. And you want to get all your knowledge like that. You want to build almost infallible knowledge on almost infallible knowledge. Just have better quality standards. When it seems kind of almost infallible, it's not literally infallible, but that means you're actually reaching significant confidence. You want your philosophy ideas that you're building up to be more like your understanding of how to use a microwave, where you actually know what you're doing, and you know what you're doing. You'd be kind of confused if I was like challenging you or like really surprised or something. You'd be like, of course this is how you use the microwave. Like, whereas with a lot of the philosophy stuff, like you already know you're partly confused. If I challenge you, you're not like super shocked. You're not like, oh my god, how could I possibly have gotten that wrong? Whereas if I told you that you're using a microwave wrong, you'd be like, wait, what the hell? No way. But if I tell you that you're like making a logical error in some advanced, complicated philosophy thing, you're not gonna be like, no way, what the hell? You're gonna be like, oh, not again. Okay, and then I've got this concluding summary. And then after it, I actually have some sort of new stuff that I thought makes more sense and is easier to understand in the context of all the bullet points. So looking at the summary stuff, we have your brain as a computer. So consciousness, conscious computing power, very important. Learning involves practice. Automatize things. You can't just like read books and essays and nod your head. You have to do focused practice. And you have to break things into manageable parts. And if you can't learn something pretty quickly, you can break it into smaller parts, which is what I talk about soon. So if it's really important, if stakes are costly, you'll reuse a lot, you'll build a lot on it, you need an extra low error rate, extra high quality standards. And people often don't do that, and then they just never get very far in philosophy. Okay, and then this final part is about learn in small chunks. So to make progress as a philosopher, you should focus on learning things that you can successfully automatize within a week. Now, a week is not a hard limit, this is approximate, but basically keep breaking things down. Most of the stuff you should be able to learn in a few hours, or at least within the same day. If you're doing much bigger goals than that, you need to have smaller chunks where you can complete a sub-goal. And so what is a chunk? A chunk is basically something where you can evaluate success or failure. You don't want to be going more than a week without evaluating, is this working? And it's better if you can reach some sort of evaluation within a few hours, or at least within one day. You don't want to go a long time with no idea if what you're doing is not working. So there's different ways to look at it. Like if you're going to do a bunch of practice, sometimes skills take a while, and so finishing all your practice can take a while, but you can get some evaluations, you can reach some milestones in the middle. So you can have the subparts that you're finishing even though you're not really done practicing it until later. So how long it takes depends on your viewpoint on how much you're dividing it up. But you need to at least have like mini evaluations like very quickly. Like you should be evaluating success or failure at something, some like tiny little subpart. more than once an hour. Like, even every minute would be good. But then if you look at a project in bigger chunks, you could have one that takes a week. And that's reasonable. So the sizing stuff is all dependent on how you break it up. And the same project can be looked at in more than one way in smaller and smaller pieces. So I'm trying to give some like rough guidance that will be useful to people's intuition and give them a rough sense of whether what they're doing is reasonable. So one thing that can help with that is you can figure you should be finishing projects, like mini projects, but not tiny projects, within 20 hours, which is roughly a week if it's not a full-time job. That is a thing that someone with a 40-hour-a-week job could do in a week. They could find 20 hours of free time if they cared a lot and really wanted to. Or maybe you will do that in 2 weeks. And if it's taking more than that, then you're maybe not that into philosophy and kind of busy. None of this stuff is intended to be your full-time job that takes all your life, all your attention, that replaces your career or whatever. Like, you can do that, but you certainly don't have to. Philosophy learning can be compatible with having some other thing in your life, like work or school or parenting. Those are some of the major things that take a lot of time, effort, attention, etc. Anyway, you want to break things into small enough chunks that you're evaluating success and failure frequently. You don't want to fail and fail and fail and not check for failure. You want to actually finish things and succeed at things regularly. And also, sometimes you will fail, and that is okay. Things can take too long, or you can just fail. And don't keep trying until you succeed. You need to acknowledge, okay, this one failed, rather than drag it out indefinitely. People get really stuck because they want to succeed, and then they keep doing the same project for months and they don't finish. You need to call it a failure and actually reach a conclusion. It is okay if some of your projects fail. And then once you fail at a project, once you admit that you did not succeed, time has expired, it's done, failure. First of all, that it might be a partial success. It's not completely worthless. Second of all, don't do the same project again as your next project. You need to have at least one successful project before you retry on a failure. It's okay to retry again soon. You might not. You might say, oh, this was too hard, I shouldn't have done it, I need to do something completely different, and maybe I'll get back to it in a few years. That's fine. But you also might say, okay, I think I know why I failed. I've got a few ideas on what to change, so I can do this again soon. However, do not do it again immediately. You need to succeed at something before you retry. You do not want 2 failures in a row. If you get 2 failures in a row, you should go for your next one being something significantly easier. Like, you really want to limit the number of failures in a row. Every failure in a row is exponentially worse, and you should be going for exponentially easier projects every time you get another failure in a row. If you're at 3 failures in a row, you should be going like super, 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 super easy. If you're at 4 failures in a row, you should go for like the easiest thing you can think of, like something that your 3-year-old would succeed at. If you're at like 10 failures in a row, you're not listening to me at all. Like, that should never, ever happen. So yeah, do not stick to the same project until you succeed. You need to be able to say, okay, well, it's been a week. I've used up my resource budget for what I was willing to put into this project of time and attention and stuff. And I'm now going to evaluate it, and I'm going to determine that I have not successfully learned this. And then I'm going to think about what project I should do next and whether I should reattempt this soon or not. And that will help you avoid getting stuck. Do not keep beating your head against the wall. When you start a project, you should have an idea of how long it's going to take, roughly. If you don't have an idea of how long it's going to take, then you need to create an exploration project where you're like, okay, well, I'm going to spend 3 days looking into this, and then maybe I'll be able to figure out how long it'll take. And then you have a time limit on that. The time limits don't have to be hard or exact, but they're simple and a reasonable approach. So you can use time limits. There are other ways to do it, but time limits can be on the safer side, because you really don't want to keep indefinitely failing at the same thing. So you can never predict and organize your learning perfectly. You don't know how hard everything's going to be. It's a skill that you can get better at. So it's okay to fail some, but you should definitely be succeeding most of the time. If that's not happening, then you are chronically doing things that are too hard. And that doesn't mean avoiding hard topics necessarily, because you can take a hard topic and do an easy project about it. Like if your project is read a Wikipedia article on this topic, you can succeed at that project even though the topic itself is hard. And that project can provide some sort of benefit. Like it'll give you a rough idea of what the topic is about, which will help you figure out if you want to put more effort into learning more about it. You can have a small project like determine, is this topic something I really need for this other project? Is this topic like relevant enough that I need to allocate a bunch of resources to it or not? And that is a thing that you could figure out, even though it's a hard topic. And you can figure that out without learning it. You can make a reasonable evaluation of whether it is something that you should be looking into or not. And you can ask other people, like asking several experts, is this stuff in your field relevant to what I'm doing? Do I need it or not? That is a way to get an answer. It's a way to succeed, even though you're dealing with a hard topic. Anyway, if you do many small, fast, successful steps, sometimes called gradualism, you can make lots and lots of progress. If you skip steps and try to make big steps, it tends to mean less progress and more failure. So, having lower ambition project steps, mini projects, tends to result in more and faster progress. If you are ambitious in general, then you should do many low ambition steps. Doing ambitious steps is just going to lead to failure. You generally want to learn things that are adjacent to existing knowledge you have that's really high quality, and then you can build on it and only build a little at a time. And if you don't know what high quality knowledge you already have that you're working adjacent to, then you're probably skipping a bunch of steps. If you start having low confidence or confusion, you're probably skipping a bunch of steps. And should work on stuff that's closer to what you're already good at. And this applies for adults. It does not apply for infants. I mean, maybe it does, but what I say at the very end, in the little tangential parenthetical, is that we do not have a great understanding of learning for infants and really young children. Partly because they don't already have a big base of existing knowledge. Adults already know a bunch of stuff. You do have things that you're good at and confident at that you can build adjacent to. Whereas how do you get started when you don't already have that is a trickier question. Anyway, early learning, we only have a more limited understanding of, not what I've been talking about. So if you like this, you should subscribe and get my emails. And then you can review this article later using the table of contents. You can remember and maybe even take brief notes about what each section is about. And you can review specific sections when you want to use them or remind yourself of what they said. So I hope this will help people. I've been trying to figure out why people have trouble learning philosophy and how to explain it so that people can learn it better. So on the one hand, I have philosophy ideas, like stuff about decisive arguments and how to have a rational debate and paths forward. And idea, goal, context, triples, and charts. And I think those philosophy ideas are really important and advanced and build on existing knowledge like Popper. But on the other hand, over the years, I've noticed people have trouble learning very much in philosophy. So I've put a lot of thought into how does learning work? How can people learn? Not just as abstract concepts like learning works by evolution, which Popper explained, and there's definitely value in that is useful. But I wanted some more practical stuff of what should people do. So I've written a lot about the subconscious and about practice and about automation and so on. And I think those are the concepts you need to manage your own learning, which is still a different thing than actually teaching it. Like, I'm teaching you about how to learn rather than being your teacher and guiding your learning for you. So this is still harder than going to a class where a teacher just tells you all the stuff and guides what activities you do. This is teaching you the process of how you can teach yourself. It is for self-learners. So maybe that's still too hard for a lot of people, but it's easier than when I just write about philosophy and then I'm like, okay, learn this. And then people are like, they don't know how to learn. So this is teaching you how to learn, so maybe that will help you learn my actual main philosophy ideas. I mean, there's some original important stuff in here, although it's less original than my main ideas. And then there are some people who just need me to be like their tutor and guide them every day because they can't manage their own learning. And I don't have time for that. If you're rich, maybe I could do a few people, but what I want to do is explain how to learn, and hopefully, like, I don't know, 1% of the population would be able to use this and apply it themselves. I do have some more concrete stuff, like I have an article about grammar. And this is more specifically just teaching you an actual topic. This is not about learning how to learn grammar, it's just telling you a bunch of stuff about grammar. And it's easier to learn with this article than if you just do a Google search and find some random educational materials, because I went and looked at many educational materials and I figured out what was important, and I broke it down for you and organized it for you and dealt with a lot of the issues where most of the educational materials are mediocre quality. So in order to learn, you need to look at many different sources and compare them and see how they're different and agree, and you need to judge which ones are good on which issues. And that's all hard. So I made an article on grammar that's meant to be more canonical. It's like a single high quality thing where you don't have to consult a bunch of different sources. It's like how if you want to learn math, there's no one textbook that's very good. So it'd be nice if someone would actually write a good textbook, but I haven't done that. So to learn math, you have to like get 5 textbooks and read how different textbooks explain the same thing until you figure it out. And it's a lot more work to learn that way, but that's kind of how the world is. You're not usually going to find a single great source on a subject. And making them is tons and tons of work. Like you have to learn the subject really well and you have to make them and all that. And anyways, I put a lot of work into grammar in particular. It was useful and interesting to me, and it's related to textual analysis, which is really important to philosophy. Like, you need to be able to actually understand what things say. I found this out when I was trying to debate people and have discussions over the years. I realized at some point that people frequently misread things, and they write sentences that don't say what they mean to say. And this is partly at just a grammatical level. Their automatized understanding of grammar is inadequate, and so they get confused about things like which words form groups within the sentence, and which modifiers modify what other words or groups. In other words, they don't understand the tree diagram of the sentence of what is a child of what, and what the subtrees are, what are the important groupings, and what things modify what. And so that's really important to being able to do philosophy stuff. So I was trying to work on some of the more basic skills. Anyway, so this is a more specific thing that just teaches you the subject. And then the article I was talking about today is teaching you how to learn in a general abstract sense, rather than teaching you a specific subject. So it's telling you about, like, you need to practice, rather than telling you specifically what to practice. This is a generic thing you could use for learning anything. So hopefully, for the people who are pretty smart and want to be great philosophers or intellectuals or whatever, this is easy enough, accessible enough that they can be useful and they can actually do it. I'm not sure, but I'm trying. But I do think this is still too hard for most people. Like my grammar article, I think, is significantly more accessible. A lot more people could read it and learn something from it. Whereas this one, it's more abstract. It is, to some extent, just abstract philosophy stuff. If you don't already have great learning skills, that could be hard. But, I put it in bullet point form. I've broken it down. I've tried to make it fairly simple and get the main points across. So if you take all this stuff and then you try to actually do it, if you try to apply it and actually practice some things, maybe you'll be able to see how it works and get experience with it and understand what I'm talking about. And some people already have significant experience practicing something. They learned a sport or a video game really well. A lot of people play video games casually and never learn anything, but some people actually practice what they're doing in a video game and become really good at it. So have you ever done actual like training and practicing to get really high skill in a video game or a sport? Or you just remember practicing worksheets in school and you didn't just hate it and put it out of your mind? Maybe some of that could work. So you probably already have some experience with some sort of practice, and then you can do some more practice. Maybe you've practiced a musical instrument, I don't know. And hopefully that will make this concrete enough to actually be useful. Whereas with like decisive arguments, people have less experience to draw on. So hopefully you have some past experiences that help you with this, and then you can, after you read this, you can go practice some things. Anything, and it doesn't have to be related to philosophy. It could be physical skills if you find that easier and you want to start there, that's totally fine. And you can go practice things, and then you can make connections between what you're doing when you're practicing and this article, and you can see how things fit together and start to recognize automizations. Like you can recognize, oh, I automated this when I did this practice, and you can see what that's like and play around with these concepts and get a better grasp on them. And if you do that a lot, then combining your experience and understanding with these broad guiding concepts about how learning works and what the learning process should be, you can hopefully be a more effective learner. Because there are a lot of people who have experience practicing things and they're trying to learn things and it doesn't go very well, and because they have conceptual confusions about how learning is supposed to work or what the goals are, they don't even know what they should be trying to do, so they're just kind of muddling through it. So I hope giving a high-level overview of how to learn, how it should work, what the right concepts are will help people. If your only guidance was like some stuff about induction, then that's not really going to guide your practice, and you won't know the right ways to think about practice and how to use it and stuff. All right, good luck, and if you have any questions, you're welcome to ask on my forum.